Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Texas Football Orange Bloods YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about the transfer portal and give you some specific numbers for Texas, and then talk about perhaps guys they should be looking at. But before we get all that, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to like the video. So I'm curious, Ketch. Let's start here. What do the numbers from a scholarship standpoint look like right now for Texas?
Well, that's an interesting question because there's no easy answer. A lot of it's going to come down to what the NCAA does with its senior transfers, or just they haven't figured out from year to year what it means to have given that extra year of eligibility.
Right.
COVID. So, do the super seniors count against the 85-man number? They do as of now. And so when you start thinking about Anthony Cook coming back, and you start thinking about, they've had a handful of guys, Deshaun Jameson's coming back, those guys count against the 85-man number at this point. And if they don't, if the NCAA in the spring says we're not going to punish teams for that, that was our screw up. We had to, at some point you'd think they would err on the side of cutting the schools a break. They haven't yet. But if they were to do that, you're talking about 3 more spots. Now, they also have a kid who's technically committed to them right now, Ronald Lewis, who, if you were to ask me what I think will happen by the time the next signing day comes along, a little bit like Anthony Jones peeled off and went from Texas to Oregon, Texas has told Ronald Lewis, like, hey, let's wait and kind of see what happens numbers-wise. It's kind of, at that point, it tells a kid, I'm not their priority. And, they may tell him like, hey, if we've got a number, we'll still take you. But I think it's been made clear to him that he should probably explore his options. Kind of hard to know what's going to happen there. Like, technically, he's still a committed player. He hasn't officially decommitted, but I don't know how to read his situation. And these all seem like really individualistic, like isolated instances, but the numbers have a chance to get so tight by the time, we get to even February, that one guy here may be the ability for you to go out and get an inside linebacker that might be able to start for you and not. And so the numbers are so tight that we've reached a point with Texas where you're counting spots. So they're at 27 commitments, but that's 26 if you don't count Ronald Lewis. But then you've got to go ahead and add in the fact that Quinn Ewers is in this class as well. So because they have a scholarship stashed away, they are at 33. That's how many they can take. Total math, incoming players. Right now they're sitting at 27. So they've got 6 spots left. 6 spots. If then they've hit their maximum number of players. What's been really interesting is that so far Texas hasn't been so super active with transfer portals because they clearly prioritized high school football recruits. It might have helped with the offensive line. That maybe they don't get all of the offensive linemen that they got in that last week. Maybe Cameron Williams decides they just got too many guys, and it's going to be competitive because they brought in a transfer or 2. But Texas laid off all of the offensive linemen that have come into the portal so far. And there have been good players, and Texas has, at this point, they're sticking with their tune to the Devon Campbells of the world, a 5-star offensive lineman who still hasn't made his final decision as to what he's going to do. They are going to wait that out. And if they end up taking an offensive lineman in the transfer portal, which I think everybody thinks they need to do, they need to beef up who can come in and contribute immediately, who can be an instant starter potentially. Baylor got a couple of those guys. Like Texas, they can't just throw a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old or 18-year-old kids out there and think that, we'll be okay when Alabama rolls around. That's a recipe for disaster. So they need, I think, to go into the portal and find some offensive line help, but they're not going to do it at even 1% of a risk to what they've got cooking right now on the high school recruiting side of things. So I don't know that we've got a real feel for the numbers they'll take on the transfer market until we really know how many high school guys that they're still taking. And, what's been interesting is even with guys that it seems certain they're not going to get, they are still protecting their assets in terms of the high school football recruiting more so than the portal. So it's made for a pretty slow news cycle with regards to portal players outside of obviously the biggest one in Quinn Ewers.
Well, and what's interesting is the offensive line thing. Like I would think that would be certainly an area they'd be looking to improve through the portal with the ability to get experienced guys. Like, what do you foresee this offensive line? Who are the starting five next year? Do you see Kelvin Banks jumping in there? Do you see NATO jumping in there? Like what's your read on what the starting five will look like next year if they don't add through the portal?
Well, I think it's really hard to say because, most of the guys that they've signed in this past recruiting class are interior players. Right. Kelvin Banks, I think, can play tackle, but his best position is likely inside. Some people don't think Cameron Williams, who's one of the guys in this class that I think Texas is counting on to, potentially give them some. I mean, Cameron Williams could start at right tackle, or he could not play tackle at all because he's too far away, or maybe that's just not his best position. We're talking about a 375-pound kid right now. He has not yet gone up against outside rushers at this level for there to really, he's looked good in camps, but we don't know yet, like if Joseph Osai is on the other side of him, can he be good enough to warrant leaving at tackle? I think Alex Dunlap and I think yes. We think he's just a big old man mountain, but like that has to work itself out. And I think that with every single offensive lineman in this class, someone's going to play. Who that is, I think, is hard to define. I think you work your way maybe backwards from this. That Junior Angelau is one of your starters. That Jake Majors is going to start for you at center. And now you start looking at, okay, well, our tackle situation, what does that look like? And, I think that that's where the help is needed most, because I don't know that if I say, hey, Christian Jones is coming back, do you definitely want him starting at left tackle, right? Even if he has all of the experience in the world, that might, even though that guy, Christian Jones could turn out to be an NFL player. Texas has so often been forced to put guys on the field before they're ready that by the time they start to get ready, fans have decided we don't ever want to see that guy play again. And he could legitimately with another year under Kyle Flood, maybe the light switch comes on for him in a way that, Tope Amade talked about it going off for him midway through his sixth season. I mean, sometimes it happens. Sometimes it never happens. And sometimes it happens when it happens. And Texas has been so forced to put guys in early. I realize this isn't an answer to your question, but it is the nuance to the answer to your question.
Right.
Because they do have some starters coming back, and then they have guys who have been starters who haven't been good starters. And isn't that the story of all bad teams? How do you get bad? Well, your players just weren't good enough. It might be that Christian Jones isn't good enough. It might be that Andre Carrick is a guy, even though he started at tackle, maybe he's not good enough. So what is that? Does that mean you have to play Cameron Williams? Does that mean that Kelvin Banks plays a position that's not his best position? But by God, you're just trying to survive. Texas is going to be relying on so many young players. I don't know how, even with 5 stars, I don't know how you go in and say, oh yeah, left tackle, that's definitely going to be Kelvin Banks, because if not, we're screwed. If that's the thought process, like YOLO with regards to either these 18-year-olds are ready or we're going to be bad next year and we're wasting one of our seasons with Quinn Ewers, that's the thing that they've got to figure out and balance. So far, they haven't reached out to any offensive lineman in the portal. None. And there have been good players, really good players. LSU just landed a kid that was, tearing it up at Florida Atlantic. And as a young guy with 4 years of eligibility left, or 3. And see, I'm getting my COVID years, my red shirt years.
Oh, it's very difficult. Stuff. It's very difficult to figure out.
I think he has 4. He has 3 to play 4. But so I was kind of half right, backdoor technicality right. But they, Texas is just, Devon Campbell is so important. It's really about Devon Campbell. It's about part of their sales pitch to Devon Campbell is, and it was the same with Kelvin Banks and NATO and a number of these guys. Hey, you've seen who we got. If you come in, you are going to potentially play right away. To bring in a transfer before those guys make a decision, it's like, oh, that guy was a freshman All-American last year.
Right.
Oh, we're not going to start him. You know what I mean? Like, they believe the sales pitch right now, which is, if I come in, Texas is going to need me immediately. And Texas is hoping that that's the sales pitch that resonates. Our need, Texas's need. I think that the moment they add, even the moment that it looks like they're in the transfer market, I think some of these guys are like, okay, well, I'm a sign. And then how many offensive linemen are you going to sign? Like, part of the reason why I like you guys is I can play right away. You've been telling me that. But now you're going to sign some guys. So I think that if Texas is going to do anything in the offensive line market in the portal, because there have been guys that can absolutely help Texas out right away. But none of those guys have even said Texas has reached out to them. It's clear. I think it also, with Devon Campbell, maybe that's an indication of how good they feel. Like, we ain't doing nothing that's going to screw that up. And that includes tinkering around with even the idea of a transfer. But it is risky. It is risky because, as I've outlined, they were just okay on the offensive line a year ago. They lose Derek Kerstetter. They've lost a couple of guys now. Tope Amade at the end came out of nowhere and was arguably their best offensive lineman in the last month of the season. So it gets to be really tricky with the combinations they're going to go with. Are they going to go with who they think is their best five? Is there somebody that they think has to play left tackle that, regardless of what his best position is, they don't have an obvious left tackle. And not even if they get all the offensive linemen that they want in this class, there's just not one of those. That was last year. That's who Tommy Brockermeyer was. There's a bunch of 5-star level offensive linemen this year, but nobody that fits that profile. So it does make you wonder if come August, Texas is trying to tinker with some square pegs and round holes and hoping that they can just jam that sucker in there and that it works out okay. Sometimes you can get by and survive that way, but sometimes it can be your fatal flaw that, in a 12-game season comes back to haunt you numerous times. And it's one of the question marks about this Texas team. Back in the old days, I'll shut up after this, but back in the old days when we were all buying magazines in the summer to, that's how we learned about, I'm going to buy Athlon. I'm just going to read the whole damn magazine. And then I'm going to know every team in the country frontwards and backwards. Texas will not be a team that I think anybody can get their pulse of before July. Like, don't buy a magazine, because that magazine is not going to be able to tell you who's playing along the offensive line in August. Like, literally, you buy the magazine. I don't mean to hate on the magazine industry. I'm just specifically pointing to Texas and how kind of on the fly in 2022 this thing is going to be in some really critical areas. Because if they do get a guy like Devon Campbell, are they ever going to go in for an offensive lineman? I think it's hard to know what they've left themselves. If it's like, we'll potentially shop in March or April for offensive linemen. I mean, maybe that works, or maybe you've waited too long. And, roster management, not just recruiting classes, roster management has turned into the most important aspect of college football. And if you're bad at it, look at what just happened at Michigan State and Baylor. Those guys did great jobs coaching, but they did even better jobs of roster management. They were Baylor goes and gets an offensive line transfer from Buffalo. Texas wasn't trying to do that. But in a game with really fine margins, Baylor found a few. I don't know that moving forward, if a coach has had a full year to get a team prepared, recruiting's not enough. I think people are waking up to they're going to watch Alabama. They've watched Alabama this year, and they're like, that Jameson Williams dude, he's good. And Tua is like one of their playmakers. They've already got the best cornerback that was in the portal this year. They just pulled the kid from Georgia Tech.
Running back, yeah.
It's going to start getting so mainstream that if you get into a season and you're like, oh, well, we just didn't have a player, that's on you moving forward. That's on you not managing your roster better. And I think that's one of the real $1 million questions for Steve Sarkisian this offseason. This isn't easy. I mean, managing how all of this works is so new to college football. Yeah, Steve Sarkisian's never done this before as a head coach. Last year was his first. Now we'll see how he learns from that experience. But, all those years that he spent as a head coach at Washington and then at USC, that didn't prepare him for what the job asks him to do now. And I think some guys, it's probably easy for Nick Saban to say, I just take the best players, but you have to figure out your way. What's your method? What is your working process? I think they know what it is on the high school recruiting side of things.
Yep.
I think it's TBA with the portal. And this past year, if we were to say, well, what did they do a year ago? You'd go, well, they took a bunch of guys that weren't good, but they weren't good at major programs. So, the playbook from how they handled a year ago would say they'll look for some guy on the Alabama roster that wasn't good enough at Alabama, but, Alabama's trash is better than other schools' treasures. That didn't work out a year ago, though. That didn't work out with Ray Thornton going from LSU and, the big program guys that transferred. That didn't really help. So will they do that again? I think that's what they were comfortable with a year ago, but you would think like they would come out of this season and go, that didn't work. Couldn't rush the passer. And we spent half of our slots going after guys that we thought would help there. So I don't know, like I have my eyes wide open. It's the awesome thing about us doing videos every single day.
Right.
Because we're learning stuff about how they're going to take on all of the challenges that they deal with on a day in and day out basis. And, it's as good as any reason to just hit the little subscribe button right there. I'm not going to say it any other time, Anwar. Ari and Anwar just are too damn close together. It's Christmas. I've been wrapping presents all day. I'm watching a Liverpool game. I'm doing a dissertation while watching a soccer match. Just a lot of stuff going on in my brain.
You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that, Ketch. You're not supposed to admit it. You're just supposed to just roll.
I want people to know how good I am. That like I've been sitting here, just blah, 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 blah. And they're like in the 92nd minute in this Liverpool-Leicester City match. No, I won't ask any other time. I'm just going to say if this has been informative and you want to experience this on a day in and day out basis, subscribe. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
So in terms of like roster management, I think it's so interesting because I've talked to a few coaches about this, and I mean, they've told me, you basically have to have a scouting department. And so, you've had, you're obviously, your coaches are scouting and constantly looking at, and evaluating high school players. But then, you need to sort of take one guy or another, somebody else and move them into that sort of like advanced scouting where they're watching basically players across the conference, across the country. They're looking at the portal. One coach says, they're basically doing a ton of advanced scouting, whether or not guys are on the portal or not. They just want to have like a sense of like, oh yeah, we know that guy. He was, he did this in that game, and we like, so it's not even just, not even just watching film on the guys that are in the portal, but it is like advanced scouting to the point of like having a knowledge and a working knowledge of, depth charts and everything across universities. And that's what I think catches. I don't know that that's happening in Texas. And if it isn't, it needs to be.
No, you're right. And what it is it used to be like the guy that was your high school football recruiting director. That was the guy.
Right.
And what we've seen at other programs is now they, like an NFL team, they have a guy that's just in charge of player personnel.
Exactly.
And it's a different thing than there's a guy who's responsible for making sure guys get all the letters and what's going on a weekend. And then there's a guy whose job it is to manage the roster and to know. I think the transfer portal stuff really goes into the idea of a player personnel guy, because Texas almost needs to have its own transfer portal department.
Right. Totally.
And it's going to happen. It's going to happen at Alabama first, probably Georgia. Somebody will do it, and then everybody will copy. It would behoove Texas. But that, what makes that scary is coaches don't like to be the first to do things. So, and they like to keep their inner circle small. So, head coaches in college football are about we see this in the NFL all the time. What do NFL coaches always want? More power. What is it that in the future, if you're going to be really good in college football, the future where this portal thing is only getting bigger from here on out. This isn't minimizing.
Can't neglect it.
It's going to be either you are good at this or you're not taking advantage of what you're doing. But that means to hire good people, you have to give them some power and responsibility. That is not what head coaches at the collegiate level aspire. I mean, Urban Meyer wanted to do it all in the NFL. How'd that go? How'd that go trying to make every decision? Not good. You know what? Maybe the head coach shouldn't. Maybe the head coach shouldn't. By the way, Liverpool just scored to make it 3-3 with like 2 minutes to go. I'm a total pro. Watch how it's like the game. I'm not even mentioning the game. It's like it's not even happening. I look at what Sarkisian has to do, and he has to do the really hard thing. And I think hire somebody that has some actual responsibility. How do they do that? Because imagine that you put your head coach in charge of the same thing in the NFL. You could see, we see all the time why it's problematic. You and I are having a really interesting conversation here just about where this thing is going, and where this thing would seem to be going is that in the future, head coaches at the collegiate level are going to have less power, and they're going to have to volunteer that because they can't be scouting the portal all the time. So that has to be somebody's job. And honestly, the best way for a guy like Steve Sarkisian to get the most out of Quinn Ewers is that he's able to commit himself to Quinn Ewers in a way where little things like overall roster management, scouting college players, and all of that stuff. And I know they have some guys that already do some of this stuff. I'm talking about really talented people, though, and not people this is their first or second job in college, and this is how they grow up in the industry and eventually get bigger jobs. I'm saying you're adding a big job.
Right.
And this is what Gary Patterson should be doing for Texas.
Yeah.
This should be Gary Patterson. This is what he should be doing. Scouting college players, because scouting is what he does best. And helping you manage a roster in like a big boy, he tells people what to do kind of way, and not he's just another assistant.
That's a great call on Gary Patterson. And it seems like that's a perfect role for like a former longtime head coach.
Yes.
Because a big part of this too is understanding your blind spots and projecting out and we think we're good along the offensive line. Are we? Who's our left tackle? Or we think this guy projects to be starting at left tackle for us this year. All right. But we're like, are we good in the slot? Are we good on the outside at receiver? Are we, which guys do you almost have to basically say, like, here's our 2 deep going into the season. And we expect these guys that are coming in as high school players to be able to make that 2 deep. But you know what? I don't feel great about where we are at left tackle. I don't feel great where we are at slot receiver. I don't feel great about where we are at inside linebacker. And like, those are areas where then you go and say, okay, find me guys to fit that need in the portal. You can go crazy and just find guys that you think are cultural fits at any position. Or you could be like, all right, project out to what we think our 2 deep is going to be once the season gets in, once we get to fall camp and the season gets in, and where are we projecting some of these high school players to be? And then where do we think, well, maybe we could probably use some depth. It's the same as free agency in the NFL. It is impossible to build a championship level roster without utilizing it in some capacity. You just need to understand where the areas we're going to be most compromised and make sure that you fit the right players into those most compromised spots.
Well, it's an industry where the head coach has so much control that, like, if one of his guys gets arrested, the county sheriff or whatever
calls him.
Like, who do I call? Oh, I call Joe Paterno. Like, what else would you do, right? It really is. And I think it's one of the strengths of Steve Sarkisian is he doesn't seem to be a guy that, well, I say that he doesn't let his assistant coaches talk during the season. you know what? I'll hold back on.
He stole that from Saban, though.
He did. But you know what? Saban's probably going to get out right as this thing starts to go a little bit of. I really think if you don't know who your director of player personnel is in your program, then your program in the future is messing this thing up.
Yep.
Like that is even more so than the offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. Nobody has a more like in the future is going to, because what's going to happen is when they sit down and have daily conversations and they say, all right, you know what, we've done our roster analysis and we definitely need to find somebody who could help us in the slot. Who are our top 5 slot guys available right now? That's a really hard thing for Steve Sarkisian right now. They don't have, and to be fair, like we're talking about something that I don't think exists in most programs. You are building a completely new division inside of your football program, and you're making it just like pro football. You're treating the portal just like free agency. And to the extent that in free agencies, when they have that's when recruiting visits come into play for the NFL. You know what I mean? This thing, they're headed to each other more than they are splitting apart.
Yeah.
All the way down to we think there will be more teams in the playoffs moving forward. What do we know about the NFL? The NFL can't get enough damn playoff games. They want play because so the college football will eventually get there. College football will eventually get to a point where there are enough teams in the playoffs and they're going to be like, God, do you know how much more money though we can make if we just put 4 more teams and there's 2 more games? Like, that's $50 million. We can't turn that is where they're headed. But it all starts, I think, in this infancy stage of, because I think the tricky thing for Texas is I don't have a good answer for you. If you were we were having a different conversation and you said, who's in charge of making the decisions of who the guys are in the portal that Texas goes after and doesn't go after? I don't know the answer to that, really. And it feels like that's a Sarkisian answer. And it's like, God, but that sounds really hard.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. You know, it is like asking an NFL guy, hey, you're also in charge of your scouting department.
Right.
You know, so I think that I bet Mel Tucker's got guys at Michigan State. You know, he's got his guy that handles this for him, because when you see the season end in some of the schools that have had immediately have success, you know they've got that built in. Season ended and suddenly they got 5 guys that they're taking in their recruiting class for the portal. That doesn't happen by accident. You're just not like, oh wait, I heard that guy was pretty good back in the day. No, you know. So it'll be interesting if in a few months someone at Texas builds up the answer to these questions. And I'm curious to see what the next time Steve Sarkisian talks to the media will be the next signing day, I believe. These will be the types of questions I think he gets asked.
In February, yep.
You know, the first signing day is all about the high school kids. And you're talking about recruiting, all these little nuanced stories. But that's not the second signing day. There's not a lot of new names. But you're still getting 45 minutes with the coach. And I think that's when you're going to see a lot of what's the protocol on this? How does this work? Every school is going to have a different answer. And, you know, I bet by the time we get to February, this will be a part of the conversation in college football in general.
That's Geoff Ketchum. I'm Ari Temkin. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But for now, appreciate it.
Modcast tomorrow.
Modcast on Thursday.
Yeah, depending on when you're watching this video, you might just want to. You could be watching this video on Thursday and just hop on over and watch the Modcast. One of the best videos that we do on a weekly basis. And I think we're doing it live at 9:30 in the morning Central Time if you are watching this on Wednesday. So come hang out with us, get your questions answered. We'll be interactive. It'll be our, I don't know, probably not our last. It'll be our second to last live show of the year. So don't miss it.
Excellent. All right. We're out. Peace.